All right, so we're on module 6. We're ready to dive in and start editing our video, taking out the bad parts, the mistake, putting two different things together, start to adjusting the timing. So all of that is going to be covered in this section. The first thing that I want to talk about is tracks and being able to stack content on top of each other. And working with the tracks on your timeline is an important part when you're working with video. So we're going to dive into that. But also we need to know what the timeline controls do, how to play, how to pause, how to rewind, how to jump to different parts of your timeline. The timeline is down at the bottom. We learned about that when we were covering the editor UI, but we're also going to talk about the playhead. The playhead is basically what starts to move. We can use that playhead to jump to different parts of our video, but we can also use it to select different things and select different portions of our video. And then when we do that, we can stitch things and delete things and have that auto stitch together. We'll talk about doing that and turning it off if you don't like it. But we'll also talk about extending the frame. If something happens or you have unwanted movements, oftentimes you may need to extend the frame and kind of fix that. So we'll talk about what that is. But then there are other times when you're editing video that you may need to ripple deletes and kind of move things over, and that's what's called ripple delete, and have everything move over at once. Or even we may need to expand and make some room for some content along our timeline. So we'll talk about what's called ripple move and basically explore both the move and the delete portions of that. And then even how to stitch and put things together after we've already edited if we need to have a little bit more of a smooth animation across different clips as well. And then we'll talk about adjusting the clip speed, speeding things up, slowing it down, having things go a little bit faster or a little bit slower to kind of work with your timeline and your video. And then with all of that, we'll start to group things and talk about what grouping is and ungroup things as well. And grouping and ungrouping comes in handy, especially when you're working with a lot of different tracks. And then finally, I'm going to share all of the different timeline shortcuts to help speed up your editing. How to go forward real quick, how to go backwards real quick, how to pause, all using your keyboard. The timeline shortcuts is going to save you a whole lot of time if you learn how to use those. So we have a huge section to cover. Let's go ahead and dive in. In this video, we'll focus on how to manage tracks in Camtasia 2023. To start, let's learn how to remove the empty tracks. Right-click on a track and select Remove Track to delete individually, or select Remove All Empty Tracks to get rid of all empty tracks that have nothing on them. If you made a mistake and deleted a track accidentally, quickly undo with Ctrl-Z on Windows or Command-Z on a Mac to bring the tracks back. Tracks allow us to stack content on top of each other. For example, let's add an annotation on track 2. Don't worry, we'll dive into annotations in a later video, but for now, I'm just going to add on a simple shape. Notice how the new shape on track 2 covers a part of the screen recording. If you click and drag track 2 below track 1, notice how the annotation goes away. But if I move the screen recording off to the side here, it will show that the annotation is right there. So make sure you pay close attention to the order of your tracks and how they are stacked. Let's do Ctrl-Z to go back to the original track stack order. It also helps if you name your tracks. You can double-click on the track name and give it a new name. I will name this second track Annotations. Name it something that will help you remember what type of media is included on that track. I will rename track 1 as Screen Recording. At times, you may want to preview your video with certain tracks on or off. For example, to focus on editing this screen recording track and hide the annotations track, click on the eyeball icon next to the annotation track. When you preview the video, the annotation will not appear until I click on the eyeball again and it turns it back on. If you want to focus on editing one track without others getting in the way, right-click and select Enable Solo Track. This temporarily hides all other tracks so you can focus just on that one track. To view all tracks again, right-click again and select Disable Solo Track. The magnet icon is a different style of editing, snapping clips to the left and keeping them together. You can activate it and deactivate it as needed. You can also resize your tracks by clicking and dragging the lines between the tracks to make one larger or smaller. You can also use the slide above the tracks to resize all tracks at the same time. You could even right-click to minimize or maximize the size of the track. That helps you focus on a specific track timeline, so you can see specific edits and changes so you can really fine-tune your video. Are you working on a multi-monitor setup? You can take advantage of this space by detaching the timeline. Do this by right-clicking and selecting Detach Timeline to drag it to another screen. Close it to return to the original position. To prevent unattended changes, lock a track by clicking on the lock icon. This keeps items in place while you adjust other parts of your video. This is helpful when you edit mistakes out of a screen recording or camera recording, for example. I do not want changes to the annotations layer, so I will just lock that layer and delete some of the spaces I have in my recording. Don't worry, we'll talk about how I deleted parts of my screen recording soon. Understanding tracks is crucial for adding annotations, effects, and stacking elements efficiently. Let's now see what we can do with the timeline controls in the next video. In this video, we delve into timeline controls within Camtasia. The first feature I want to talk about is something we'll use all the time, and that is the zoom slider above your timeline. This allows you to zoom in and out of your timeline to make precise edits and cuts to your video. Next to the zoom controls is the magnifying glass. This will help bring all of your media into view. If you have a video that's several minutes long, this will ensure all your media is visible so you can see your timeline as a whole. There are a couple of other controls that become available when I select something on the timeline. These are tools I can use to make edits to my chosen media file. We will go through each of these tools so you know what they do and then talk about when you need to use them. Since you'll be using these tools often, it is beneficial for you to memorize the shortcut keys to each. You can see what the shortcut key is by moving your cursor over the tool, pausing for a second, and then seeing the text that shows up. Using these shortcut keys will drastically help speed up your video editing. As we go throughout these tutorials, I will point out what shortcut keys you can use as you edit. The first tool I want to cover is the Cut tool. The Cut tool will remove whatever media is selected. So let's choose one of our media files and go up to Cut. Notice that when I select Cut, it does not split the file, but it just removes the file from the timeline altogether. If you accidentally make a mistake, there is an Undo and a Redo button on our timeline controls. You can also use Ctrl-Z on a PC or Command-Z on a Mac to undo what you just did. You can also copy and paste on your timeline like in most other tools. Let's select one of our annotation objects on our timeline. Go up to the timeline controls and choose Copy. Now let's move our playhead down a couple of seconds here and hit Paste. You will see that it created a duplicate file for me on my timeline. This is incredibly useful when you created an object and you want to reuse it, and it especially becomes useful when you have an animation on the object so that you don't have to recreate that animation. You'll notice that in my media file, I have a lot of pauses. I suggest removing those pauses. To do this, I take my playhead at the beginning of the pause and then go up to the Split tool. Make sure that you have your media selected. The shortcut key for this is the letter S on a PC or Command+T on a Mac. You will make a split at the playhead, and now I can move my playhead to the end of the pause and hit Split again. This has cut out the pause, and now I can select the pause and then hit Delete. Remember to have your object selected before you use the Split button or shortcut key. Without the media on the timeline selected, the split will not work. Once that pause is removed, I can click and drag my media on the right over so there's no blank screen in my video. We're going to talk about quicker ways to edit out chunks of your video in future lessons. But know that splitting up your media is the basics of editing out parts of your video that you don't want. You can also export out a frame of your video, which would be especially helpful if you need to build out a YouTube thumbnail. Move your playhead to the point of the video you want to be the frame, and then click on the Add Exported Frame button next to the Split button. This will take a screenshot of what was on the timeline and add it above the screen recording track. Now you can use this to have a pause on your screen. If you delete the image from your timeline, you will still have the image in the media bin. To grab the image and use it in another tool, right-click on the image in the media bin and select Open File Location, which will show the image on your desktop, and then you can use it for whatever you want. So those are the different timeline controls. We will be using these timeline controls for all future videos. So I wanted to make sure that we were familiar with how these controls worked before we moved on. In the following video, we'll talk about the Playhead and how you can use the Playhead to speed up some of your editing in your videos. So let's dive into that next. Now that we know how to make some basic edits using the timeline controls, let's see how we can speed up our editing using the Playhead. When I move the Playhead back and forth, it's going to show me on the canvas what is going to be visible on the screen at what point in my timeline. When you are fine-tuning your video, it is helpful for you to move your Playhead and move it slowly back and forth on your timeline. This is incredibly useful to see if your edit is smooth as you move your Playhead back and forth. Let's say I made a mistake in my video. In the last tutorial, I learned how to cut out a part of my video by moving my Playhead to the start and end of the mistake and using the split key to cut out the portion of that video. Selecting a portion of your video you want to remove is even easier with your Playhead. To the left of the Playhead, you will notice a green rectangle. To the right of the Playhead, you will see a red rectangle, which we refer to as handles. Instead of doing a split, I can quickly move my Playhead to the beginning of the part I want to have deleted, and then drag the red handle to the end of the part I want to have deleted. This will make a selection of that portion of my video. Now you can go ahead and hit the backspace button, or the delete button on a Mac. So it still leaves a space in my video. I can move my content on the right over, or I can do the same thing but a little bit differently. Let's hit Ctrl-Z to bring this selection back. We can right-click on the timeline selection and then select Ripple Delete. Or we can use Control-Backspace on a PC or Command-Delete on a Mac. And what will happen in this case is it deletes all of the content in that selection area and moves it from the right-hand side over, and it stitches the two objects together. Notice that there is a stitch connecting the two pieces together, so it is still one media. There are some benefits to still having this as one media, which we'll talk about in a later video. But for now, know that it had removed that part of the video and stitched the two remaining pieces together. One thing to notice is if I ripple delete my section, then it also moves the layers above it over, so my tracks stay aligned. Another helpful function of the Playhead selection is to export out portions of your video. Let's make another selection to our timeline. Let's move my start of the Playhead to the beginning of the clip I want, and then the end of the Playhead to the end of the clip. Now, if I right-click on the selection, I can select Export Timeline Selection As. This will allow me to export out an MP4 of just that selection. I can then upload to any video sharing tool I may be using, like Vimeo or YouTube. You can also add this clip to your library to make it reusable across projects. To do this, right-click on the selection and then select Add Timeline Selection to Library. Give this a name and notice that it will add it to my default library. We'll get into libraries later, but they contain reusable media pieces that we can use no matter what project we're in. We will dive deep into exporting and all the settings you can choose in another section. The Playhead can save you a whole lot of time when you're editing your videos by selecting portions of the video to remove, export, and save. We covered a couple different ways to split and trim your video, but we have a few more things to cover to speed up your editing time, so we'll cover that next. Up to this point, we have been learning about how to cut out parts of our video. There may be times when you still want to use the Playhead to select a portion of your video, but you don't want the media to be stitched together, and you want them to be separate clips. To turn off the auto stitch, let's go into Preferences. You can do this by going into Edit, and then down to Preferences. On a Mac, click the Camtasia menu, and then go to Settings and select Timeline. Ensure you're in the Program tab, and then find the Enable Auto Stitching option, and see that it is selected. Let's go ahead and deselect it, and then click OK. Now, if we go back to our timeline and select a portion to remove using our Playhead, and hold down the Control Backspace like we did before, it will move over the content, but it doesn't auto-stitch it together. We have two clips that we can move independently. Having this off will allow us to extend out the frame of the middle clip. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this benefit. Now you may be asking yourself, what does it mean to extend the frame? We will learn about that next. I personally like stitching it together, so I will turn mine back on. Feel free to keep yours off if you prefer it that way. But just know that you will not see the same stitching that I will as I delete sections of my video. Now let's dive into extending the frame. I mentioned in the last video that there might be times where we need to extend a frame of our video to remove something that may be happening on the stage. A way to fix these situations is to extend the frame of the good part and cut out the unwanted part that showed up, like with a movement or notification. I will find a section of my video that still has good audio, but I have a notification on my screen that I want to get rid of. Because I want to keep the audio and only get rid of the notification on my screen, I need to separate out the audio from the video first. To do this, right-click on the clip and then go to Separate Audio and Video. Now we have our audio and video files separated onto different tracks. Separating it will ensure your audio is untouched, and we only edit the video portion. Now let's remove the unwanted section using the S key to cut out before and after the notification happens. Then select the unwanted section and hit the backspace button to remove that from our timeline. If we take our playhead and move it back and forth, we'll notice that the audio continues to play, but the screen goes blank. We can't have it flash to black suddenly, so we need to fix that. We can use the last frame of the video before we made our cut to fill this empty space. You will notice that the audio was not cut. Let's extend this frame and have it just sit there for the remaining part of the audio. To do this, we hold down the Alt key on a PC or Option key on a Mac and then go to the end of the video. While holding down that key, we grab the edge of the video and click and drag. Now let's move our playhead back and forth. Notice that we have a pause screen, but we got rid of the notification and blank screen quickly by extending out the previous frame. This technique is used a lot to fix unwanted movement, to create a visual pause and remove alerts that may pop up while you're recording. Let's continue learning on how to speed up our editing in the next video by learning how to ripple move content. So with each video, we learn more and more how we can speed up our editing with additional tools and tricks. In this video, we'll take it a step further using ripple move and ripple delete. Now we have learned how to do ripple delete, but I'm going to remind you here. Ripple delete is when you select a portion of your video using your playhead, then you hold down the Alt key and backspace on a PC or Command and Delete on a Mac. Ripple delete is when it moves over your content and removes that space, which comes in handy when you want to delete a section of your video that has multiple tracks. Now there is also something called ripple move. Sometimes when you edit out portions in your video, we end up with clips that are down the timeline. Or at times, we need to make room for a new clip or recording in the middle of our media. This could create some complications when we have multiple clips or tracks we need to move. If you just move one at a time, it can make our audio, video, and annotations become out of sync. The easiest way to fix your timeline in these scenarios is to use the ripple move. Watch what happens when I try to move the first media. It becomes tedious to move one piece of media at a time. So let's fix that using ripple move. To move everything at once, all we need to do is hold down the Shift button, selecting the first piece of media to the left, and then while we continue to hold down the Shift button, move our media over to the left and get rid of any gaps in our video. I'm going to hold down the Ctrl-Z to go back. Now I'm going to add a simple annotation to track 2 to show that this works if you're stacking items on multiple tracks. And I'll copy this annotation a couple of times on track 2. Now hold down the Shift key and select both the first items on both tracks. Now still holding down the Shift key, we can move our items over to the left or to the right. This will help get rid of those black gaps in our video. If we need to split our video and make room for new media or changes, we can easily split and ripple move our media simultaneously. First, move the playhead to the point of the video where you want to insert your new media. Let's add some annotation text to this point of the video. Hold down the Shift key and select your playhead. And still holding down the Shift key, move your content over to the right, giving enough room to insert an annotation. Now let's go into our annotations and add some text. We can then insert text like Section 1 or text describing the new section. Ripple move is handy to move big chunks of content around and make your timeline as clean as possible without having to move clips one at a time. In the following video, Let's learn how to manually stitch media together or remove the stitch from our media. Now we have learned many different ways to split and trim our media, but how do we remove the stitch if we need to later on, or even add the stitch manually to our clips that we've split ourselves? Having your media stitched together lets you have one piece of media that you can move quickly on your timeline. To stitch two clips together that split manually, you have to move the clips together first of all. Hold down the Shift button and select both clips. You will see them outlined in yellow. Now with the two items selected together, go up to Edit and then down to Stitch Selected Media. We now have our media stitched together. You can tell by looking at the jagged line. If you select the media, the yellow outline is visible over the entire media and not just that one section. You can also do Ctrl-Alt-I on a PC or Command-Option-I on a Mac to stitch these items together even faster. You can also select both pieces of media by holding down the Shift button and then right-click, and you can see the option to stitch media together there as well. So many different options to get to the same thing. So what happens if you don't want the media stitched together anymore? We may want to insert some new media or extend out the frame between the split media. All we have to do to remove the stitch is to select our media and then right-click and then select Remove Stitch. Selecting that will remove the stitch, and then we are back to having two pieces of media. Now what if we still need movement on the screen and we want it to go a little bit faster or maybe slower to match our audio? Let's talk about how to adjust clip speed next. There may be times where we need to speed up our media. I find this most common when I'm typing. Often I don't want the viewer to sit and wait for me to type something out. Let's find a portion of our video where I'm doing some typing. We need to split out our media at the beginning of the clip we want to speed up, and then make a split at the end of our media as well. We need to have that portion of the clip isolated. Now right-click on the media and select Add Clip Speed. An effect is added to the selected clip. This clip speed effect allows us to adjust the timing of the clip. We can adjust the speed in a couple different ways. The first way is to select the media and come over to the properties on the right-hand side. This has added a new section to our properties called Clip Speed. We can now adjust the clip speed in several different ways. The first way is to adjust the speed. Think of this like you see in most video players like YouTube and Vimeo. Those players allow us to watch the clip at a faster speed. The default speed is 1 times, but you can change this to 2 times to double the original speed. We could also do it 3 times. That is the first way that we can adjust the speed. The second way is to type a specific duration. You can do that by either typing in seconds or minutes into this text field. That will stretch out the clip or make the clip smaller depending on the duration you give it. The other option is to specify the number of frames. Because our timeline is set to 30 frames per second, if I wanted this to take 1 second on my timeline, I would just change this to 30. If I wanted this to be a half a second, I would adjust it to be 15. It changes the speed like minutes and seconds, but it does it in frames rather than time. The final way to adjust your timing is to do this on the timeline. Anytime we add an effect on a piece of media, we see an arrow on that media. If we select the arrow on that media, it will show the effect that's been added on that media. With the effect showing, I can click and drag the clock icon at the beginning or end of the clip to drag it out to go slower, or drag it in to have the time go quicker. The video will still do the same thing, but it adjusts the speed faster or slower. This also updates the properties in your Properties panel. So those are various ways to adjust your clip speed. Remember that this allows you to keep the same movement on your screen, but have it go faster or slower to match the style of your video. There may be times that you want to move your media on the timeline without having to stitch items together. You can do that by grouping your media. Let's cover how to do that in the following video. There may be times where you want to group your media. Grouping can help when you need to move your media, but also will help clean up your timeline, especially if you have several clips stacked together. Just for demonstration purposes, I stacked a bunch of annotations on top of each other. You can do the same thing by adding on some text and shapes around the text just for a simple intro. Notice how this could get pretty hard to view on your timeline, especially if you have a smaller screen size. To group this selection, let's click and drag all the media we want to group together. Once all the media is selected, right-click over the files and then select Group from the menu. You can also use the shortcut key of Ctrl-G on a PC or Command-G on a Mac to group the media more quickly. Grouping takes all of the media and wraps it into a single item. This item is named Group or whatever number of group it is. Now if I zoom in and scroll over the group name, I will also see a plus icon next to the group title. Clicking on the plus icon will take me into the group. You can see the group's name in the tab as it opens up. We can keep this tab open and jump back and forth between the group and the timeline. The group also only shows us the items that were grouped. It preserves the timing of all of the grouped objects. To rename the group, let's double-click on the tab and name it Intro. Once we hit Enter, it will display the name of the group in the tab. Now you can make changes to the timing of the group, but not to the length of the group. You will need to adjust the length outside of the group. Let's exit the group by clicking on the X on the tab, and then it takes us back to the main timeline. Now we can move our group to the end of the timeline just by clicking and dragging one file. If we double-click into the group, you will notice that the annotations remain timed like they were before, so we can quickly move and adjust the group without throwing off the timing. Let's go back to our main timeline, and let's ungroup this. To do this, we select the group and then right-click and choose Ungroup. This will add all of our objects back to the main timeline. Grouping helps us consolidate and move media quickly. Remember that you can also have groups within groups to organize even more. Now let's wrap up this section by discussing some shortcut keys we can use on the timeline to speed up our editing even more. With each video, we learned something new that will help us speed up our editing. To wrap up this section, I wanted to discuss shortcut keys that will help things go even quicker. These shortcut keys are optional, but they make a big difference. The most common one you can use is the shortcut key to play and pause your video. I use this one all the time. You can do this one simply by hitting the spacebar to start playing your video, no matter where your cursor is at. Then to pause the video, hit the spacebar again. This shortcut key will help you when you want to watch the video, but want to keep your mouse from moving to hit the play button every single time. Sometimes we may be working on a long video, and we want to watch the video in fast mode. You can control the back and forth of this video like play, fast forward, and rewind using the J, K, and L keys on your keyboard. Now this is extremely helpful, not only to watch your video quicker, but also to go back a little bit in your timeline without having to click and drag the playhead. So the K key will pause your video just like the spacebar will. But remember that it does not play the video. It comes in handy when you're fast forwarding and rewinding and must stop the video without having to go down to the spacebar. If your video is stopped, you can either press the spacebar or you can start the video by hitting the letter L. As the video is playing, you can hit the letter L again. It will play back in double speed. If you hit the letter L again, it will go even faster. This could be used to move the playhead just by using your keyboard. Now to rewind or move your playhead in reverse, press the J key, and if you press it again while it's playing backwards, it will reverse in double speed. This allows you to move your playhead back and forth just with your keyboard without having to move your hand to the mouse and then click and drag the playhead. While using the shortcut keys could take some getting used to, the JKL shortcut keys save you a ton of time editing and are common in other video editors as well. Now, sometimes you want to jump to the following media cut or split. You can do this by using the timeline controls as well. Hold down the Ctrl-Alt, to go to the previous split, or Ctrl-Alt to jump to the next split in your timeline. On a Mac, you can do the same thing by using Control, or Control without having to press the Alt as well. If you want your playhead to move just one frame at a time, to get precise, you can use the next or previous frame buttons on your timeline controls. These are the most common shortcut keys you can use to get even faster with your editing. Let's do a quick review of everything we've learned about in this section, and then talk about what we'll learn about in the next module. So in this in-action video, we're going to take everything that we've learned about editing, put it all together, and edit a video. So we'll record it and then we'll edit it. I am going to make some intentional mistakes and common mistakes as I go through this, and so you can see how I actually edit the video here. So let's go ahead and hit record. It's going to record my screen. We'll record my microphone as well, but not my camera. Everything is good to go there, so I'll just hit record, and then I will make it through here. All right, we're going to walk you through how to update a product. And so the first thing I do is come into products here, and then I go into list. Once I'm inside a list, then I will go in and once I'm inside of the list, I'll just go in and just update. Once I'm inside of the list, I'll go ahead and select on one of the products. And then inside of the product, I'll come in. And then inside of the product, I'll come in and update the label. Once you are done, over on the top right-hand side, just click on Save. All right, so we've recorded our video, and I intentionally made some mistakes. Some of the mistakes were just normal as well, where I had to repeat myself a couple of times. And that is pretty common when you're editing these videos. You may have to repeat. You may have to look over and look at the next steps on what you're doing. That is okay. We can edit that out. We can make our video sound really good. And we're going to use everything that we learned about in this section, all these different pieces, to kind of put it together and do it quickly. All right, so there is our video. The first thing I like to do is I like to come in here and just remove the very beginning part. I had a pause at the beginning, so I'm just going to select this and move this over, and then hit Control Delete to move that over. That will ripple delete everything over. Let's go ahead and listen to this and edit out some of our mistakes. All right, we're going to walk you through how to update a product. And so the first thing I do is come into products here. So there's a little bit of a pause. We can just get rid of that by holding down the Control button or Command button if you're on a Mac, and hitting Control Delete, and that will ripple delete it and remove that space there. Is come into products here. Now we do have a big space right here, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. Hit Control Delete, and then I'll listen to it before products here. And then I go into list just to make sure that the pause is long enough, or if it's too short, if it's not short enough, that kind of thing. So now I'll do the same thing. Now you'll notice that I intentionally left that little Windows screen to pop up. Let's say that you made a mistake. You want to keep this pause at the beginning here, but you do not want to have that happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a cut. And so I'll use the letter S. If you hover over this, you can see the S there. And then I will just go ahead and move this over a little bit and just hit the letter S again. And let's say I want to keep that length, then I go ahead and just hold down the Option button and just drag that over. That will extend the frame, and it will not have that pop up. So now that we've fixed that, but we want to make this go a little bit quicker. So I'm going to just split it again at the beginning. So I'm going to hit the letter S. I'll split it at the end here. This is where I want it to end. And I'll select both of these, and then I will stitch these together. So stitch selected media. Now I'll right click on this, and we're going to go ahead and add clip speed. Now I can just click that second option right there just to drag it and make it as fast as I can. So nothing is really happening, but if something was happening, I can still keep that, remove the little pop-up that happened, make the clip really fast, and have that kind of blend together as well. So let's go ahead and continue. Once I'm inside a list, then I will go in and once I'm inside of the list, so that was a mistake, so I'll just go ahead and remove that as well. Once I'm inside of the list, I'll just go in and just update. Once I'm inside of the list, that was another mistake, so I'll just come in here and update that as well. Once I'm inside of the list, I'll go ahead and select on one of the products. And then inside of the product, I'll come in. So we have our little pop-up right here that's happening. We could get rid of that space. Let's get rid of that space right here. But that pop-up is happening at the same time as the audio. So what I'll need to do, because I want to keep the audio, is I'll need to separate the audio. So by right-clicking, I'll go into Separate Audio and Video. Now that I have the audio separated, what I'll do is I'll take out that part that the pop-up happens. So that was the start of it, and then we're going to go ahead and move to the end of it right there. And then I'm going to hit the letter S
And then we're going to delete it and hold down the Option button and just extend that out there. Now I'm still talking at this point, and then inside of the product, I'll come in, but the pop-up doesn't happen at this point. There's a space right here, so I can go ahead and just hold down the Control button and delete that as well. So just by extending the frame, by adding and stitching media together, we're able to make our audio and our video sound a lot better. Let me cut out this extra space here and then cut out this last space. Now this may be a repeat as well. Let's listen to that. Once you are done, so I'm going to go ahead and split out that part here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that part and then remove the end. And there we go. If you want to have both audio and video separated through all of them, you could actually go in here and separate audio and video. Don't worry if there's no audio, it'll just be silence at that point. But we have our audio and our video. Now let's ripple move this out. Let's say we want to add like a little space in between there and extend this frame out for some reason. Then I'm going to go ahead and just hold down the Shift button and just click and drag to move that out. Now we can then extend the frame, holding down the Option button. And there we go. So now we add a space back into it. So that's really how you go in and you edit the majority of your screen recording. Now we will add on different effects like zoom in, zoom out, different transitions as well. So we still have a lot to cover, but I at least wanted to take all of the different things that we learned about in this section and kind of place it all together with this example. You can download this example before I started editing if you just want to use mine, or you can go ahead and create your own as well.
All right, that was module 6. We've covered a lot. This is probably the biggest section in the certification, but there was a lot to cover, and this is probably what you'll be using the most often when you're editing your videos. And so we covered a lot of things like tracks and how to stack different things and how to organize tracks, make them larger, make them smaller. We also talked about timeline controls, being able to pause and quickly jump to different portions of your video. We then talked about the playhead and how important the playhead is, especially when you're selecting different portions of your playhead and deleting those portions and having them auto-stitch together, or even how to turn off auto-stitching. We covered that. We also talked about extending the frame, which is a real common thing that I do when I make a mistake or I move my mouse too much. I can extend the frame to kind of fix that as well. We also talked about ripple move and ripple delete, moving everything off so they don't, your timing, if you're deleting a portion in the middle, your timing behind it doesn't get thrown off. We also talked about ripple move so we can stretch things out and have everything on your different tracks move over as well. That comes in handy. We even talked about being able to stitch media together instead of the auto stitch, actually putting two pieces of media together, stitching that, which also helps with the smoothness of your animations and your cursor. We then talked about clip speed, being able to slow things down or speed things up based on your needs for your narration. So we talked about how to do that. And then we talked about grouping and ungrouping. If you don't, you could have stacks, several stacks, and they could get out of hand, but being able to group those stacks, especially if you're doing a lot of animation, really comes in handy, and even knowing how to ungroup those when needed. So we talked about that. But then the last thing we talked about, and I definitely recommend that you go back and you write down all of the shortcuts, and that's the timeline shortcuts that we talked about in the last video. That will save you out of anything a whole lot of time and help you become faster in your video editing. So we've covered a lot how to edit your video, but I have not covered a lot on the audio. So in the next section, we're going to talk about editing your audio and the different things you can do with your audio settings. So let's go ahead and get started on that.